You don't belong here, and you sure as hell don't belong in this seat." The words cut through the first-class cabin like a blade. Sharp, public, final. For a split second, the entire aircraft seemed to stop breathing. The hum of the auxiliary power unit dropped into the background. The soft clink of glassware froze mid-air. A man halfway through lifting his champagne glass paused, the rim hovering just below his lips. Somewhere farther back, a roller bag thudded into an overhead bin, too loud in the sudden stillness. The woman who said it stood rigid in the aisle, heels planted, chin lifted. Melissa Grant did not whisper. She did not lower her voice. She wanted witnesses. Her eyes were fixed on the man seated in 1A. He hadn't looked up yet. He sat still, spine straight against the cream leather shell, one hand resting loosely on the armrest, the other holding a paperback novel with a cracked spine. His jacket was navy, slightly worn at the elbows, the kind of jacket that had lived a life. A scuffed leather duffel rested in the bin above him, pressed between two polished carry-ons that smelled faintly of money and newness. From Melissa's point of view, the math was offensive. This seat was wrong. This image was wrong. The universe had misfiled something, and she had every intention of correcting it. "I'm talking to you," she said, sharper now, leaning closer. "This is first class. Seat 1A. My seat." The man finally looked up. His eyes were calm, not confused, not apologetic. Calm in a way that unsettled people who were used to resistance or submission. He took a breath, slow and even, as if he were grounding himself before speaking. "I believe you're mistaken," he said. His voice was low, controlled. "No edge. This is the seat on my boarding pass." Melissa laughed. It wasn't humor. It was disbelief sharpened into sound. She turned her head slightly, inviting the nearby passengers into the moment. "Did you hear that?" she said. "To no one and everyone. He thinks this is his seat." A few heads shifted. A woman in 2B tightened her grip on her purse. Across the aisle, a man folded his newspaper with deliberate care, lowering it just enough to watch. Melissa took a step closer, invading the space between them. Her perfume was expensive, floral, aggressive. It filled the small pocket of air. "Look," she said, lowering her voice just enough to sound condescending rather than loud. "I don't know how you ended up here. Maybe a system glitch. Maybe miles. Maybe you talked your way into an upgrade. It happens. But this seat was paid for. Full fare. And I need it." The man glanced down, briefly, at the boarding pass tucked into the book. Then back at her. "I paid for this seat as well," he said. "And I'm quite comfortable." That was when her expression changed. Not anger yet. Something colder. The look of someone realizing they were being told no by a person they had already decided did not have the right to say it. Melissa exhaled through her nose. "I don't think you understand how this works." She reached into her handbag with a practiced motion and pulled out a folded bill. $100, crisp. She waved it lightly, close enough that the man could see the watermark. "Here," she said. "Take this. Move back to 4B. You'll still get free drinks. Everyone wins." The sound it made when she flicked the bill was soft. Paper on air. But in the silence of the cabin, it landed like an insult dropped on marble. The man's jaw tightened. Just slightly. He didn't take the money. He didn't raise his voice. "Put that away," he said, "and step out of my personal space." For the first time, someone behind them inhaled sharply. A flight attendant paused mid-step near the galley, eyes darting between the two. Melissa's face flushed. The color crept up her neck, clashing violently with the white of her tailored suit. "Unbelievable," she said. "I am a Diamond Medallion member. My family has flown with this airline for over 20 years. I have meetings. I have a migraine. And I am not sitting in the 4th row because you're having some kind of moment." She snapped her fingers at the passing attendant. "Excuse me," she called out. "We have a problem." The attendant, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled tight into a bun, stopped. Her name tag read Monica. Her smile was polite, practiced, already tired. "Yes, ma'am?" "This man is refusing to move from the seat I was promised," Melissa said, pointing. "I want him relocated immediately." Monica looked at the man in 1A, then at the tablet in her hand, then back at Melissa. "Ms. Grant," she said carefully, "we discussed this at the gate. Seat 1A is assigned to this passenger. Your seat is 4B. Melissa laughed again, louder. "You cannot be serious. Look at him." The words landed heavy, ugly. Not loud enough to be called a slur, but sharp enough to cut. "He's probably flying standby," Melissa continued. "An employee, or some kind of courtesy case. Bump him. I guarantee he'll take the cash." The man closed his book. Slowly. Deliberately. The sound of the cover meeting paper echoed in the cabin. When he looked up this time, the warmth was gone. His eyes were steady, measuring, like steel that had decided it no longer needed to pretend to be soft. "Monica," he said, reading her name as if he'd memorized it the moment he boarded. "Is the cockpit door still open?" Monica blinked. "Yes, sir. The captain is finishing pre-flight checks." "Good," he said. Melissa scoffed. "Oh, what is this now? You're going to tattle to the pilot?" "Please. Captain Hayes and I are old friends." The man stood. He was taller than Melissa expected, taller than she liked. The space between them closed without him taking a step toward her. He didn't look at her. "Not yet. I'm not asking the pilot to settle a seat dispute," he said calmly. "I'm asking because under federal aviation regulations, a passenger who disrupts the safety and order of the cabin before departure can be removed from the aircraft." He paused. "And right now, this plane isn't going anywhere." Melissa laughed, sharp and dismissive. "You're being dramatic." The man reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. For a fraction of a second, Melissa flinched. He didn't pull out a phone, or a wallet. He pulled out a matte black card. No name, no picture, just a holographic emblem etched into the surface. A symbol that meant nothing to her, but everything to Monica. The blood drained from the flight attendant's face. Mr. Reed," she whispered. He finally turned his eyes to Melissa. "That's right," he said quietly. "Jonathan Reed." And in that moment, before the engines ever turned, before the door ever closed, the balance of power in that cabin shifted forever. Monica didn't move at first. Her hand hovered near her tablet, fingers frozen, as if the air itself had thickened around her. The name echoed in her head. Jonathan Reed. She had seen it only in internal briefings, in corporate memos marked confidential, in videos played once a year during mandatory leadership training, always accompanied by phrases like ownership structure and final authority. She had never seen him in person. No one had. Not like this. Jonathan Reed watched her carefully, not impatient, not angry, just waiting. "Please," he said again, quietly. "Tell Captain Hayes that I'm on board, and ask him to cut the engines." The word "cut" landed like a dropped plate. Around them, the cabin began to stir. Subtle movements. A man in 1B leaned back, eyes narrowed, recalculating everything he thought he understood about the situation. The woman in 2B stopped pretending not to listen. A murmur rippled backward, low and electric. Melissa Grant scoffed, waving a hand as if brushing away smoke. "This is ridiculous. You people will believe anything. A fancy card, a calm voice, and suddenly we're grounding planes." She turned to Monica, voice rising. "Do your job. We're already delayed." Monica swallowed. Her throat felt dry. She glanced once more at the card, at the emblem, at the clearance stripe that ran along its edge, visible only under a cabin light. The kind of thing you were trained to never question. "Yes, sir," she said, and turned. The walk to the cockpit felt longer than the jet bridge. Each step was heavy, deliberate. The cabin held its breath as she passed through the curtain, her shoulders tight, her spine straight, as if bracing for impact. Melissa crossed her arms, satisfied. "Watch," she muttered to the man across the aisle. 5 minutes, and this little performance will be over." Jonathan Reed sat back down. He didn't adjust his jacket, didn't glance around to gauge reactions. He picked up his book again, resting it flat on the tray table, his hands folded loosely on top of it. His breathing was steady, measured. The posture of someone who had already made the decision and did not need to convince anyone else of it. Melissa stared at him, unsettled by the lack of response. "You know," she said, leaning closer again, her voice dripping with contempt. "People like you always overplay your hand." Jonathan didn't look up. "I said," she pressed, "people like you." The words hung there, ugly and deliberate. Across the aisle, the man in 1B shifted, uncomfortable. He cleared his throat, then thought better of it. Silence felt safer. Then the sound changed. A low hum faded. The subtle vibration beneath their feet softened, then stopped entirely. The air vents slowed, then went still. The cabin lights flickered, briefly, before switching to a harsher, emergency tone. The plane powered down. A collective groan rose from economy, muffled but unmistakable. Melissa's mouth fell open. "What did you do?" she demanded, spinning toward the galley. The cockpit door swung open with force. Captain Hayes stepped out, his jaw set, his cap still in his hand. He looked irritated, ready to confront whoever had disrupted his pre-flight flow. His eyes scanned the cabin quickly, landing on Monica first. Her face was pale. "Who ordered the cut?" he began. Then he saw Jonathan Reed. Everything about his posture changed. His shoulders squared, his spine straightened, his expression drained of irritation and filled with something else. Recognition, respect, and something dangerously close to fear. He stopped mid-step. "Sir," Captain Hayes said, his voice dropping an octave. "I wasn't informed you were on board." Jonathan stood. "No need," he replied evenly. "I prefer it that way." Captain Hayes removed his cap fully now, holding it against his chest. "Apologies for the delay." Melissa laughed, sharp and incredulous. "You've got to be kidding me." The captain turned to her, his expression hard. "Ma'am, please remain seated." "Do you know who I am?" she snapped. Captain Hayes didn't answer her. He looked at Jonathan instead. Waiting. Jonathan nodded once. "We have a situation." "Yes, sir." Jonathan gestured calmly toward Melissa. "This passenger attempted to bribe another passenger, verbally abused the crew, and made discriminatory remarks regarding my presence in this cabin. She has created a hostile environment before departure." Melissa's face twisted. "That's a lie." Jonathan didn't raise his voice. "I do not feel safe flying with her." The words landed heavier than any accusation. Captain Hayes inhaled slowly. "Understood." Melissa took a step forward, panic flashing through her composure. "You can't do this. I'm a platinum member. I fly this airline constantly." "You were," Jonathan said. He reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out his phone. The screen lit his face from below, casting shadows across his eyes. He tapped once, then put it on speaker. "Operations," a voice answered crisply. "This is Jonathan Reed," he said. "I need you to access the manifest for this flight. Passenger Melissa Grant." 1 second passed, then another. "I have her file, sir. Revoke her frequent flyer status. Effective immediately. All miles forfeited." "What?" Melissa gasped. "You can't," Jonathan continued. "Flag her profile. Add her to the internal no-fly list across all partner airlines. Refund her ticket to original form of payment." "Yes, sir." "We don't want her money," Jonathan added, eyes never leaving Melissa's face. The line went quiet. Melissa's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the armrest, knuckles white. "This is insane," she whispered. "You're ruining my life over a seat." Jonathan leaned closer now. "Just enough." "No," he said softly. "You ruined it over arrogance." Sirens wailed faintly outside the aircraft, growing louder. Captain Hayes stepped aside as 2 uniformed officers appeared at the open door. "Is there a problem here?" the lead officer asked. "Yes," Jonathan said, standing tall. "This woman is trespassing on my aircraft." The word "my" landed with surgical precision. Melissa screamed as the officers reached for her arms. "Don't touch me." "Do you know who my lawyer is?" "No, ma'am," the officer replied calmly, securing the cuffs. "But you can call him from the terminal." As they led her down the aisle, her heels slipping against the carpet, her voice broke into something raw. "This isn't over. I will destroy you." Jonathan didn't flinch. He watched her go, expression unreadable, until the door closed behind her with a heavy, final thud. The cabin was silent. Captain Hayes turned back to Jonathan. "Sir, do you want to remain grounded?" Jonathan looked around the cabin now. Really looked. At the shaken faces, the uncertainty, the quiet awe. "No," he said after a moment. "But before we leave, I owe these passengers an explanation." He stepped toward the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried, calm and resonant. "My name is Jonathan Reed. I own this airline. I apologize for the delay." A ripple moved through the cabin. Shock, recognition, reassessment. "But before we depart," Jonathan continued, "I'm going to make one small change." He paused, "and I think it will matter." The engines stayed silent. For now. Jonathan Reed didn't return to his seat. He stood there at the front of the cabin for a moment, the intercom still warm in his hand, letting the silence stretch. Not the awkward kind, the heavy kind. The kind that forces people to sit with what they've just witnessed. Faces stared back at him, some wide-eyed, some guarded, some suddenly embarrassed. "This delay shouldn't have happened," he said at last, his voice even, unhurried. "And it certainly shouldn't have happened the way it did." He glanced toward the empty aisle where Melissa Grant had been dragged out only minutes earlier. The memory was still fresh. The echo of her heels, the sharp click of the cuffs. To make it right, Jonathan continued, "Every passenger on this flight will have complimentary Wi-Fi and premium beverages for the duration of the trip." A murmur rolled through the cabin. Low at first, then louder. Relief, approval, gratitude. But Jonathan didn't stop there. "There is," he added, "one more thing." He handed the intercom back to Monica and stepped away from the first row. Not toward the cockpit. Not toward the galley. He turned and walked through the curtain. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. First class smelled like leather and citrus wipes. Economy smelled like recycled air and coffee that had been brewed too early. The lighting changed, harsher, flatter. The seats narrower, packed tight, knees pressed into plastic backs. Conversation died as he moved down the aisle. People recognized him now, not by his face, but by the weight he carried. Phones appeared, then disappeared just as quickly when his eyes passed over them. No one wanted to be caught filming this. Jonathan scanned the rows slowly, intentionally, as if he were looking for something specific. Row 32, middle seat. A young woman sat hunched forward, shoulders tight, elbows pinned to her sides. She wore a faded grey hoodie with a university logo stretched thin across the chest. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail that had given up hours ago. A stack of flashcards rested on her tray table, half highlighted, half bent at the corners. Her pen tapped once against the plastic, then stopped when she noticed the shadow fall across her row. She looked up. Her eyes widened. Jonathan saw it immediately. The reflexive panic, the expectation of correction, of reprimand, of being told she was doing something wrong just by existing in the wrong space. "Excuse me," he said gently. She scrambled, hands flying. "I'm sorry. I'll put the tray up. I know we're delayed. I wasn't—" "That's not why I'm here," Jonathan said. She froze. He leaned slightly to read the name stitched onto the strap of the backpack jammed under the seat in front of her. Emily Parker. "Are you studying?" he asked, nodding toward the cards. She swallowed. "Yes, sir." "What for?" "Medical boards," she said, voice quiet but steady. "Step exams." Jonathan glanced at the cards. Dense handwriting, diagrams sketched in the margins, muscle groups, pathways. Someone had put hours into these. Stolen hours. Late night hours. "You look exhausted," he said. She let out a short, humorless breath. "I am." "Where are you headed?" "Zurich," she replied. "Then Geneva. I have a fellowship interview. Connecting flight." Jonathan nodded slowly. He could see it now. The calculation she'd made. Cheapest fare, longest route, middle seat. Because the opportunity mattered more than comfort. "I couldn't afford a direct flight," she added quickly, as if defending herself. "So I'm just trying to make use of the time." Jonathan straightened. "Emily," he said, saying her name like it mattered. "How would you like to move up to business class?" Her brow furrowed. "I'm sorry?" "There's an open seat," he said. "Seat 4B. It reclines fully. Has a desk, proper lighting." She stared at him, stunned. "I can't afford that." "I'm not asking you to pay," Jonathan replied. Around them, heads leaned into the aisle. People pretended not to stare while doing exactly that. "I didn't do anything to deserve it," Emily said, almost apologetically. Jonathan shook his head. "You're wrong." He gestured toward the flashcards. "You earned it. You're using your time to build something. That matters." Her lips parted. No sound came out. "You're moving," he said, firm but kind. "Pack your things." For a second, she didn't move. Then the reality hit her all at once. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled, uninvited, unstoppable. "I'm sorry," she whispered, standing too fast. "I just thank you." Applause broke out behind them. It started with one person, then another. Then the entire economy cabin joined in, clapping not for luxury, but for fairness. Jonathan lifted her backpack himself, slinging it over his shoulder. It was lighter than it looked. All books, no frills. They walked forward together. As they crossed back into business class, the mood had shifted again. The passengers who had earlier watched in silence now couldn't meet Emily's eyes. Some looked ashamed, some looked thoughtful. Jonathan settled her into seat 4B, the same seat Melissa Grant had sneered at. "Monica will help you with the controls," he said. "Get some sleep. You have an interview to ace." Emily nodded, wiping her cheeks. "I won't forget this." Jonathan smiled, small and genuine. "Just pass it on." He returned to his seat in 1A. The man across the aisle leaned toward him. "That was something," he said quietly. "I've been flying for 30 years. Never seen that." Jonathan buckled in. "We fly people," he replied, "not wallets." The engines came back to life, a low, powerful rumble that vibrated through the floor. The plane pushed back from the gate at last. For a moment, it felt like the story might end there. It didn't. As the aircraft began to taxi, the captain's voice cut in again, tighter this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but we've been instructed to return to the gate due to a discrepancy with the luggage count." Jonathan opened his eyes. That was rare, especially now. The plane slowed, turned. His phone buzzed in his hand. A message from his head of security. "We have another situation at the gate. A male passenger demanding to board. Claims to be related to the removed passenger. Causing a scene. Airport ops wants guidance." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He typed back 2 words. "Let him on." The plane docked with a heavy jolt. The cabin door opened. Footsteps thundered up the aisle. A man in an expensive suit appeared, face flushed, tie loosened, eyes wild with entitlement. He scanned the cabin like he owned it. "Where is she?" he shouted. "Where's my wife?" Jonathan stood, slowly. "Mr. Grant," he said, stepping into the aisle, blocking the man's path. "I assume—" The man sneered. "Who the hell are you?" Jonathan met his gaze. The answer was coming, and it was going to hurt. Brian Grant took another step forward, close enough that Jonathan could smell the sharp bite of peppermint gum and expensive cologne layered over sweat. The kind of smell that came from a man who was used to boardrooms, not being told to stop. "I asked you a question," Brian said. "Who are you?" Jonathan didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held the space between them, an immovable line. "You're standing on my aircraft," Jonathan replied. "Lower your voice." A ripple passed through the cabin. People leaned back into their seats, instinctively creating distance. Emily, already curled into the wide business-class seat, froze, her hands gripping the armrests as if the scene might spill forward and pull her into it. Brian laughed, loud and dismissive. "Your aircraft?" He gestured wildly around him. "You some kind of security consultant? A manager?" "Because let me be very clear. My wife was assaulted and humiliated on this plane. She texted me before your people took her phone. She said a man in seat 1A threatened her." Jonathan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes hardened. "Threatened," he repeated. "Yes," Brian snapped, stepping closer again, chest puffed out. "Verbally abused, intimidated. She was scared for her life." A few passengers gasped. A woman near the window whispered, "Oh my God." Someone farther back muttered, "That's not what happened." Jonathan raised one hand, palm out. "Not in surrender, in command." "Enough," he said. Brian scoffed. "Don't tell me enough. Do you have any idea who I am?" Jonathan tilted his head slightly. "I do now." Brian straightened his jacket, smoothing the lapels like a man preparing for a photo op. "I'm Brian Grant, Senior Vice President of Operations at Apex Logistics. We handle fuel distribution for half this airport. One phone call from me, and this plane doesn't move for weeks." The irony hung in the air, thick and almost cruel. Jonathan studied him for a moment, as if placing a puzzle piece where it finally belonged. Apex Logistics, he said calmly. Chicago-based. CEO is Daniel Whitaker. Brian's confidence flickered, just for a fraction of a second. That's right. I had lunch with Daniel last Thursday, Jonathan continued. We're renegotiating supply contracts next quarter. Brian laughed again, but it sounded forced now. You expect me to believe that? Jonathan reached into his pocket. Brian flinched. This time, Jonathan pulled out his phone and unlocked it, the screen lighting his face. He tapped once, then again. A video call connected. A man appeared on the screen, silver-haired, glasses perched low on his nose, seated behind a wide oak desk. Jonathan, the man said, surprised. I thought you were en route. I was, Jonathan replied, never breaking eye contact with Brian. I have a brief delay. I'm currently on one of my aircraft with one of your executives. The man on the screen frowned. Which executive? Jonathan angled the phone slightly so the camera caught Brian's face. The color drained from Brian's cheeks. Daniel, Brian stammered. Hey, this is a misunderstanding. Daniel Whitaker's expression hardened. Brian, what are you doing on that plane? Brian swallowed. My wife was removed. I was just defending her. You boarded a secured aircraft, Daniel said sharply. Without authorization? Brian's mouth opened. Closed. He also accused me of assault, Jonathan added calmly, on my own aircraft. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Even the hum of the cabin felt muted. Daniel's voice dropped, cold and precise. Did you do that, Brian? Brian's hands trembled. She told me. I didn't ask what she told you, Daniel cut in. I asked what you did. Brian looked around the cabin, searching for sympathy. He found none. Not from the man in 1B. Not from the flight attendants standing rigid near the galley. Not from the passengers who had watched everything unfold. I was protecting my family, he said weakly. You threatened a partner, Daniel replied, and compromised a critical contract. Jonathan leaned in slightly. Daniel, I won't do business with a company that allows its executives to behave like this. Daniel didn't hesitate. Understood. Brian shook his head violently. Number. Wait, you can't do this. Brian Grant, Daniel said, each word deliberate. You are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Hand your company badge to the flight attendant and leave the aircraft. The words hit like a physical blow. Brian stared at the phone, his face collapsing. I've worked for you for 15 years. And in 15 minutes, Daniel replied, you destroyed that. The call ended. Brian stood there, swaying slightly, as if the floor had tilted beneath him. His expensive watch gleamed uselessly on his wrist. His power, his leverage, evaporated in real time. Jonathan stepped aside and pointed toward the door. Get off my plane, he said. Brian's voice dropped to a whisper. You ruined my life. Jonathan's gaze was unyielding. No, You revealed it. Security moved in, firm but efficient. Brian didn't fight. He couldn't. As he was escorted down the aisle, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on nothing. When the door closed behind him, the cabin exhaled. Applause broke out again, louder this time. Not polite, not restrained. It rolled through the aircraft like a wave, raw and cathartic. Jonathan waited for it to pass. Then he sat down. The plane sealed, the locks engaged. The engines roared to life, stronger now, as if reclaiming momentum that had been stolen. As the aircraft finally began its takeoff roll, Jonathan glanced toward business class. Emily was asleep already, curled into the lie-flat seat, her flashcards scattered neatly on the side table. He looked forward again, out the window, watching the runway blur into darkness. The storm inside the cabin was over, but the storm outside it was just beginning. The aircraft lifted cleanly into the night, the city lights of New York dropping away beneath the wings like a constellation dissolving into black water. For a brief stretch of time, there was peace. Seatbelt signs clicked off. The cabin settled into a low murmur. Champagne was poured again, slower now, hands steadier. The crisis had passed, or at least that was what everyone wanted to believe. Jonathan Reed closed his eyes for a moment, letting the pressure of the day drain from his shoulders. He had handled the confrontation. He had contained the damage. Inside the aluminum shell of the plane, order had been restored. Outside it, the consequences were already moving. 3 rows back, a man in a tailored charcoal suit leaned toward his wife and whispered, "This is going to be everywhere by morning." She nodded without replying, her eyes flicking instinctively to the phones, now glowing discreetly in passengers' laps. Someone in economy had filmed the arrest. That much was obvious. Someone always did. Jonathan knew the pattern. Shock first, then outrage, then narrative. And narrative, once loose, never asked permission. He reached for the scotch Monica had placed quietly beside him and took a single sip. The warmth spread, controlled, grounding. He did not drink to escape. He drank to think. Across the aisle, the man in 1B hesitated, then leaned slightly toward him. "For what it's worth," he said in a low voice, "I'm glad you were on this flight." Jonathan met his eyes. "So am I." The man nodded, then sat back, the exchange complete. In business class, Emily shifted in her sleep, brow briefly creasing before smoothing again. The seat cradled her in a way economy never could. For the first time in days, her body was letting go. Jonathan watched her for a moment longer than necessary, not out of sentimentality, but recognition. He had been her once, minus the hoodie, minus the debt, minus the grace she carried without knowing it. His phone vibrated in his hand. A message from Chloe Bennett, his head of communications. 12 missed calls, 5 voicemails, a single text preview that made his jaw tighten. "Call me now. We have a problem." Jonathan didn't call back immediately. He waited until the cabin lights dimmed fully, until the rhythm of the flight settled into something predictable. Then he stood, walked quietly toward the galley, and stepped into the small, private space near the crew rest area. He pressed call. Chloe answered on the first ring. "Jonathan, where have you been?" 30,000 feet, he said. What happened? She exhaled sharply. Melissa Grant posted a video. Jonathan closed his eyes. Of course she did, he said. She didn't post the arrest, Chloe continued. She didn't post the bribe. She didn't post the slurs. What did she post? A tearful video from the back of a rideshare, Chloe said. Low lighting, smudged mascara. She says you screamed at her. Says you told her she didn't belong. Says you used your power to have her arrested because she challenged you. Jonathan leaned back against the wall. The metal was cool through his blazer. How far has it spread? He asked. 3 million views in under an hour, Chloe replied. She tagged every major outlet. The hashtags are ugly. Billionaire bully, abuse of power. There are calls for your resignation. Jonathan was quiet. Jonathan, Chloe pressed, we need to respond. Immediately. We release the cabin footage. We shut this down before it grows legs. No, he said. Chloe fell silent. No? No, Jonathan repeated. We wait. Wait? Her voice rose. She's lying to the world. I know. And you're fine with that? Jonathan looked back through the narrow opening toward the sleeping cabin, toward Emily, toward the calm he had created with intention. Let her talk, he said. Let her tell it her way. That's reckless, Chloe snapped. Public opinion doesn't reward patience. Jonathan smiled faintly. It rewards truth. Eventually. There was a pause. You have something, Chloe said slowly. I can hear it. I did some digging while we were taxiing, Jonathan replied. Melissa Grant isn't just a marketing executive. Her father sits on the zoning board at JFK. Ooh. Chloe inhaled sharply. The same board blocking our expansion permits. Unless we pay consulting fees to a shell firm, Jonathan added. A firm tied to her family. Silence, then a low, stunned laugh. You think this wasn't random? I think entitlement like that doesn't grow in isolation, Jonathan said. I think she's never been told no. And I think today was the first time the world didn't bend. Chloe was quiet for a long moment. What do you want me to do? Hold the footage, Jonathan said. Prepare it, but don't release it yet. And when she goes on television? Jonathan's eyes hardened. Then we release everything. He ended the call and stood there for a beat, letting the plan settle. When he returned to his seat, the plane was quiet. The steady rush of air outside the fuselage sounded almost like breathing. Monica passed by and paused. Sir, she said softly, is there anything else you need? Jonathan shook his head. You handled today well. Her eyes glistened briefly. Thank you. He sat back, closed his eyes, and let the Atlantic stretch beneath him. By the time the plane touched down in Zurich, the world below was already on fire. He felt it before he saw it. The vibration of his phone against the armrest. Notification after notification lighting the dark. When the wheels kissed the runway, his screen exploded. Calls, messages, alerts. His name trending in languages he didn't speak. Chloe's face appeared the moment he answered. They're waiting, she said without preamble. Dozens of reporters. You cannot go through the main terminal. Jonathan looked out the window at the grey Swiss sky. "Where's Emily?" "Already escorted to her connecting flight," Chloe replied. "Per your instructions, no press." "Good." "And Jonathan," she added, voice tight. "Melissa Grant booked herself onto a morning show. She's going live in 8 hours." Jonathan adjusted his cuff, the worn fabric familiar under his fingers. "Perfect," he said. He stood as the seatbelt sign chimed, calm amid the chaos building just beyond the jet bridge. The truth was ready, and he was done whispering. The terminal in Zurich was chaos disguised as efficiency. Flashbulbs detonated the moment Jonathan Reed cleared customs. Microphones surged toward his face like a tide, voices overlapping, urgent, accusatory. His security team formed a tight corridor around him, bodies moving with Swiss precision, eyes forward, hands firm but restrained. "Mr. Reed, is it true you assaulted a female passenger? Did you use racial language on board your own aircraft? Why was a woman dragged off your plane in handcuffs? Are you resigning?" Jonathan didn't slow. He didn't answer. His face was calm, unreadable, carved from restraint. The questions slid off him like rain on glass. One reporter broke through the line, stepping directly into his path. "She says she feared for her life," the man shouted, shoving a phone inches from Jonathan's mouth. "She says you screamed at her and abused your power." Jonathan stopped. The terminal fell into a sudden hush, as if the building itself sensed a moment. He turned his head slightly, eyes locking onto the lens. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. "The truth has a way of flying higher than lies," Jonathan said quietly. "Wait for the black box." Then he stepped into the waiting car and the door closed, sealing the noise outside. Inside the vehicle, silence pressed in. Thick and welcome. Rain streaked down the tinted windows as Zurich slid past in grey blurs. Chloe's face appeared on the screen, embedded in the console, sharp-eyed, already 10 steps ahead. "She's going on the morning show," Chloe said. "Live. Sympathetic host. Studio audience. Full victim narrative." Jonathan loosened his tie. "Good." Chloe stared at him. "Good?" "She's going to commit to the lie," he replied. "Publicly." "You're letting her control the story," Chloe said, frustration edging her voice. "The stock dipped 2 points in the last hour." Jonathan leaned back. "It will recover." "Jonathan, Chloe," he interrupted gently. "People don't believe silence forever, but they remember being lied to." She studied him, then nodded slowly. "We're ready on our end." "I know." The hotel suite was quiet, almost reverent. Jonathan stood at the window, city lights reflected in the glass, espresso untouched on the table behind him. On the wall, mounted screen, the morning show faded in, bright and warm, engineered comfort. Melissa Grant sat on a white couch, wrapped in pastel softness. Gone was the sharp suit. Gone was the blade in her voice. Her hair was loose, makeup minimal, eyes red-rimmed with carefully measured tears. Jonathan watched without blinking. "I was just trying to get her home," Melissa said, voice trembling perfectly on cue. "I had a migraine," I asked politely, and he snapped. The host leaned in, concern etched into practiced features. Snapped how? Melissa swallowed. He stood up. He towered over me. He told me people like me didn't belong there anymore, that it was his turn now. The studio audience murmured. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Not in anger, in recognition. He said he owned the plane, Melissa continued, tears spilling now. And that meant he owned me. I felt trapped, like I couldn't escape. The host gasped. That's an incredibly serious accusation. Yes, Melissa whispered. And then he used his influence to have me arrested, while he flew here drinking champagne. Jonathan reached for the remote and paused the screen. Chloe's voice came through the speaker, tight with anticipation. She just crossed it. Jonathan nodded. She lied about direct dialogue. The feed is on a 7-second delay, Chloe said. If we release now, the producers will see it before the segment ends. Jonathan picked up his phone. His fingers moved once, decisive. Do it, he said. At 9:18 in the morning, the official corporate account posted a single link. No statement, no commentary, just 4 words. Watch with sound on. The footage loaded instantly, crystal clear, unedited, every angle, every word. The internet detonated. Within seconds, the clip surged across screens. Tens of thousands of shares, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. The algorithm fed on outrage and truth alike, and this had both. The video showed Melissa boarding, showed her posture, her tone, her entitlement. It showed the $100 bill waving inches from Jonathan's face, showed the moment she said he probably worked there, showed her sneer, her laugh, her certainty. It showed Jonathan sitting calmly, asking her to step back, asking her to put the money away, never raising his voice. And then it showed the line. I don't care if your name is Jesus Christ, Melissa snapped. I want my seat. In the studio, the host's earpiece crackled. Her expression shifted, sympathy draining away like color from a photograph left in the sun. Mrs. Grant, she said sharply, interrupting the sobbing narrative. We are receiving breaking news. Melissa froze. Your airline has just released the full cabin footage, the host continued. We're going to play a short clip for our viewers. No, Melissa said, half rising from the couch. You can't. That's illegal. You made it public, the host replied coolly. By coming here. The clip played behind her. Gasps rippled through the studio. The audience leaned forward, watching the woman on screen morph from victim to aggressor in real time. The contrast was brutal, unforgiving. Melissa's face drained of color. The host turned back to her. You told us he screamed at you. The video shows he did not. You claimed he used discriminatory language. The footage shows the opposite. The audience began to boo. This is a setup, Melissa shrieked, ripping the microphone from her blouse. It's doctored. I'm suing everyone. She stormed off the set, tripping over a cable, cameras chasing her into the wings. Jonathan turned off the screen. Phase 1 complete, he said quietly. Chloe's voice trembled, not with fear, but awe. The backlash is immediate. Public opinion just flipped. That's not the end, Jonathan replied. Within the hour, the second wave hit. An investigative article dropped, meticulously timed, devastating in its detail. It traced zoning board votes, consulting payments, shell companies. The Grant family name threaded through it all like a signature no one had bothered to hide. By noon, prosecutors announced a formal investigation. By mid-afternoon, Melissa Grant's employer issued a statement terminating her contract, effective immediately. Jonathan watched none of it. He stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear. "Hello?" a soft voice answered. "Emily," Jonathan said. "It's Jonathan Reed." There was a sharp inhale. "Sir, I saw the news. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he replied. "How was your interview?" Silence. Then a sound that broke through, raw and joyful. "I got it," she sobbed. "They offered me the fellowship on the spot." Jonathan smiled, deep and unguarded. "You earned it. I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he said. "You showed me why this mattered." He ended the call and set the phone down. Outside, the Alps stood silent and immovable. Inside, the reckoning was complete. Jonathan Reed slept for less than 3 hours that night. Not because of fear, not because of regret, but because the mind does not shut down easily after watching an entire illusion collapse in public. When he woke, the sky over Zurich was pale and clean, the kind of morning that suggested renewal without asking permission. His phone was already warm in his hand. Missed calls, messages marked urgent, board members, legal counsel, international partners, and one message he had been waiting for, sitting quietly beneath the noise. Chloe. It read only 4 words. "They're coming apart." Jonathan rose from the bed, showered quickly, dressed in the same navy blazer he had worn on the plane. He studied himself briefly in the mirror, not for vanity, for calibration. He looked the same. The world did not. Downstairs, the lobby buzzed with restrained tension. Executives in tailored suits whispered into phones. A television behind the bar replayed last night's footage on loop, the sound muted, captions scrolling relentlessly. Melissa Grant's face frozen mid-sneer. Brian Grant being escorted off the aircraft. The words breaking news pulsing in red. Jonathan walked through it untouched, a still point in a spinning room. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for 9. He arrived at 8:45. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere shifted the moment he entered. Conversations stopped. Chairs straightened. Eyes followed him to the head of the table, the seat that had never truly been questioned until now. He didn't sit immediately. "I know why you're all here," Jonathan said. His voice carried easily. No microphone required. "You want reassurance? You want control?" A few nods, tight smiles. "What happened yesterday," he continued, "was not a scandal. It was an exposure." A man near the far end cleared his throat. "Jonathan, the media." "The media feeds on confusion," Jonathan interrupted. "Truth starves it." He let that settle. "We did nothing wrong," he said. "We enforced policy. We upheld safety. And we treated every human on that aircraft with dignity. If that costs us momentary discomfort, so be it." Silence. Then one board member leaned back and said quietly, "The public response is overwhelmingly in our favor." Jonathan nodded. "Because people are tired." "Tired of what?" another asked. "Tired of being told to accept abuse because it wears expensive clothes," Jonathan replied. The meeting ended early. By noon, the stock had not only recovered, it had climbed. Jonathan left the building without ceremony. Outside, the city breathed. Normal life resumed for everyone else. For him, there was one more call to make. He dialed Emily Parker's number again. She answered on the second ring, breathless. "Mr. Reed?" "Jonathan," he corrected gently. She laughed softly. "Jonathan, I was just walking to the hospital." "How does it feel?" he asked, "knowing you belong there?" She paused. "Terrifying. And incredible." "Good," he said. "Hold on to that." There was a hesitation on the line. "I watched everything," she added quietly. "What they did to you. What they said." Jonathan stopped walking. And I realized something," Emily said. "Power doesn't have to look loud. It just has to be steady." Jonathan smiled. "You're going to be a good doctor." When he hung up, the air felt lighter. Back in New York, the fallout accelerated. Investigators subpoenaed records. Bank accounts were frozen. Zoning board members resigned. Brian Grant was formally charged before the week ended. His face broadcast across screens in handcuffs, stripped of context and costume alike. Melissa Grant vanished from public view. No apology followed. No clarification. Just silence. The kind that follows when there is nothing left to defend. Jonathan watched none of it directly. He didn't need to. Instead, he flew again. Different route. Different plane. Same seat. This time, no one questioned him. A flight attendant offered him coffee. He thanked her by name. A man across the aisle nodded in recognition, not of celebrity, but of something rarer. Respect. As the plane climbed, Jonathan looked out the window and thought of the library his father used to take him to as a child. Rows of books, some pristine, some worn thin from use. His father always told him the same thing. Never judge a book by the cover. The most important stories are the ones that don't shout. The flight was smooth, uneventful, perfect. Somewhere in the cabin, a young couple laughed softly. A man in economy slept with his head against the window. A woman read under a small pool of light, unaware she was being watched, valued, protected by systems she had never seen. This was the point. Jonathan closed his eyes and let the hum of the engine steady him. Power, he knew now more than ever, was not about winning arguments. It was about setting standards so clearly that arguments dissolved on their own. When the plane touched down, he felt no rush, no need to prove anything else. He had taken his seat, and this time, no one dared suggest he didn't belong. The world didn't slow down after the applause faded. It accelerated. Jonathan Reed felt it in the days that followed, not as noise, but as pressure. Subtle, relentless, the kind that seeps through walls and schedules, that turns every ordinary decision into a referendum. Every email carried weight. Every silence invited interpretation. He was back in New York by midweek, the skyline rising to meet him through rain-streaked glass. At headquarters, security was tighter. Not because of threats, because attention attracts proximity, and proximity invites mistakes. Jonathan moved through the building with the same quiet pace he always had. The receptionist greeted him by name, voice steady but eyes bright. A junior analyst nearly dropped his coffee when Jonathan held the elevator door and waited. A small thing, a telling one. On the 12th floor, Chloe was already standing when he walked into the conference room. She hadn't slept much. None of them had. "They're regrouping," she said, skipping pleasantries. "Not Melissa. She's done. But her father's attorneys are circling." Quietly, Jonathan set his bag down. "Good." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Good?" "When people stop yelling, they start calculating," he said. "That's when the truth finishes its work." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were timelines, transactions. Names connected by thin red lines that formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Years of influence disguised as bureaucracy. Pressure applied in places the public never looked. "The zoning board votes," Chloe said. "The consulting contracts, the shell entities. It's all there." Jonathan didn't touch the folder. He had already seen it. He had lived with versions of this his entire career. Systems that rewarded proximity to power, not accountability. People who mistook access for immunity. "Release it," he said. Chloe hesitated. "All of it?" "All of it." By evening, the story shifted again. Headlines hardened. Language changed. Allegations became evidence. Names that had never trended before were suddenly everywhere, stripped of titles, framed by dates and dollar amounts. The narrative was no longer about a seat. It was about a system. Jonathan watched the coverage once. Just once. Then he turned it off. That night, he went home alone. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. He poured a glass of water, stood by the window, and watched the city pulse below. Somewhere out there, people were arguing about him, defending him, attacking him, projecting onto him. None of it felt personal. What felt personal was the voicemail he played again, the one he had saved without meaning to. Emily's voice, unsteady, happy, real. "I got the fellowship," she had said. "I didn't think I would, but I did." Jonathan closed his eyes. In another part of the city, a different phone lit up with a very different message. Brian Grant sat alone in a borrowed apartment, the walls bare, the furniture temporary. His phone vibrated once, then again. Texts from numbers he no longer recognized. Former colleagues, distant acquaintances, people who had never spoken to him before, but suddenly needed to clarify something. He didn't respond. On the table in front of him lay a single envelope. Official. Heavy. He hadn't opened it yet. He knew what was inside. The language would be precise. Cold. Final. Across town, Melissa Grant stared at her reflection in a bathroom mirror she barely recognized. The light was unforgiving. No filters, No audience, just her and the silence she had mistaken for control. Her phone buzzed. A message from her father. Short, furious, afraid. She didn't answer. The world had moved on without asking her permission. 2 days later, Jonathan boarded another flight. This time, he wasn't checking service quality. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't testing anything. He was attending a memorial. A retired gate agent had passed away quietly in Ohio. 40 years with the company. No headlines, no drama. Just decades of showing up, of making the system work for people who never noticed her name badge. Jonathan sat in the back pew of a small church, unnoticed, listening to stories about missed birthdays and double shifts, about kindness shown in moments no one recorded. He shook hands with her family afterward, looked them in the eye, and thanked them for sharing her with the airline. On the flight home, he sat in 1A again. This time, a young man across the aisle hesitated, then leaned forward. "Sir," he said, voice unsure. "Can I ask you something?" Jonathan nodded. "Why didn't you just ignore her?" the man asked. "The woman on the other flight. Why not let it go?" Jonathan considered the question. The honest one, not the rehearsed answer. "Because letting it go teaches the wrong lesson," he said. "It tells the next person that the behavior works." The man nodded slowly, absorbing that. As the plane climbed, Jonathan felt the familiar pull in his chest. Not pride, responsibility. Power, he knew, was cumulative. It built quietly through decisions made when no one was watching. It eroded just as quietly when those decisions were avoided. He thought again of Emily, of the flashcards, of the way she had apologized for taking up space. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Jonathan reached for his notebook and wrote a single line, one he would bring into the next board meeting, into the next policy review, into every quiet conversation that followed. Dignity is not a perk. Outside, the clouds parted, revealing a clean band of light stretching toward the horizon. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in layers. Jonathan Reed felt it first in the small things. A pause at the end of phone calls, a recalibration in tone. People who used to lead with confidence now led with caution. Not fear, awareness. At headquarters, policy meetings took on a different weight. Words like tolerance and discretion were replaced with clearer ones: accountability, boundaries, enforcement, not slogans, instructions. Jonathan sat at the long table, listening more than he spoke. When he did speak, people wrote things down. Outside the building, protest signs that had once accused him of excess were quietly replaced with new ones aimed elsewhere. At institutions, boards, councils that had operated comfortably in the shadows. A senator gave a statement, carefully worded, distanced. A zoning board chair resigned before the week was over, citing personal reasons that fooled no one. Jonathan watched the press conference from his office, sound off. He didn't need the audio. The body language said enough. Hands clasped too tightly, eyes darting. The performance of innocence always came too late. Chloe stepped in without knocking. She looked tired, but lighter. "The grand jury subpoena went through," she said. "They're moving faster than expected." Jonathan nodded. They usually do once the lights are on. She hesitated. There's something else. He turned. Go on. Emily Parker, Chloe said. The medical school reached out. They want to thank you. Publicly. Jonathan frowned slightly. For what? For changing her flight? For the upgrade? They're framing it as a scholarship moment. Inspiration. Jonathan shook his head. No. She didn't earn that opportunity because of me, he said. She earned it because she was prepared when it arrived. Chloe smiled. I thought you'd say that. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the window. If they want to highlight something, he added, tell them to highlight her work, not my gesture. Chloe nodded and left. That afternoon, Jonathan received a call from an unfamiliar number. He let it ring once before answering. Jonathan Reed, he said. A voice on the other end cleared its throat. Older. Controlled. This is Thomas Grant. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. I'm calling as a father, the man continued, not as a board member. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. That distinction no longer exists. There was a pause. My daughter made mistakes. She made choices, Jonathan replied. Mistakes are accidents. Silence again. Longer this time. What do you want? Thomas asked. Jonathan's voice was calm. I want the systems you benefited from to stop hurting people who don't know how to fight back. Thomas exhaled. You've already taken everything. No, Jonathan said quietly. You lost it. The line went dead. Jonathan set the phone down and stood. The city stretched below him, indifferent and vast. That evening, he walked home instead of taking the car. The air was sharp, honest. People passed him without recognition. A woman argued with a delivery driver. A man laughed into his phone. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking for something she couldn't afford. Life continued. At a small diner on the corner, Jonathan stopped and ordered coffee. He sat alone at the counter, hands wrapped around the mug, steam rising in slow curls. The television above the register played a muted news segment. A familiar image flashed briefly. Melissa Grant's face, pixelated now, framed by the words former executive. Jonathan didn't look away. He watched until the segment ended, until something else replaced it. He thought of the moment on the plane when she had waved the money. The certainty in her eyes. The confidence that came not from achievement, but from insulation. He wondered how many times that scene had played out before, without consequence. The next morning, an envelope arrived at his office. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. You didn't have to do that, but you did. Thank you for seeing me. No signature. Jonathan folded it carefully and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. Later that day, he sat in on a training session for new hires. He wasn't scheduled. No one had asked him to attend. He sat in the back, listening as a facilitator went through protocols. De-escalation, passenger conduct, authority. A young employee raised her hand. What happens if the passenger is powerful? She asked. Like really powerful. The room shifted. The facilitator hesitated. Jonathan stood. "If the rules apply to everyone," he said, "then power doesn't change the outcome. It only reveals character." The room was silent. He met the woman's eyes. "And if the rules don't apply to everyone," he added, "then they're not rules, they're suggestions." After the session, the facilitator thanked him quietly. That helped. Jonathan nodded. Good. Weeks passed. The investigations continued. Charges were filed. Deals were made behind closed doors. Names disappeared from websites and plaques. Jonathan didn't follow every detail. He didn't need to. One evening, as he prepared for another flight, his phone buzzed with a familiar number. "Jonathan?" Emily's voice said. "Brighter now. Stronger." "How's Geneva?" he asked. "Incredible," she replied. "Hard, but incredible." "I'm glad." "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "I've started a study group for students who can't afford prep courses. We meet once a week." Jonathan smiled. "That sounds like a good use of a seat." She laughed softly. "That's what I thought." When the call ended, Jonathan boarded the plane. He took his seat. No one questioned it. As the aircraft climbed, he watched the city fall away once more. He thought of the chain reaction that had started with a single sentence. A sentence meant to diminish. It had done the opposite. The seatbelt sign chimed off. The cabin settled. Somewhere behind him, a conversation drifted forward, casual and unremarkable. Jonathan closed his eyes. The lesson had traveled farther than the plane ever would. The plane leveled out above the clouds, the steady white expanse stretching endlessly beneath the wings, and Jonathan Reed felt something he rarely allowed himself to name. Closure. Not relief. Not triumph. Closure was quieter than that. It settled in the chest like a final exhale after holding breath for too long. The kind that didn't need witnesses. He sat in seat 1A, hands folded, eyes open, watching nothing and everything at once. The cabin lights were dimmed. People slept. People read. People existed in that fragile bubble where the world couldn't quite reach them yet. For a long time, Jonathan had believed leadership was about distance, about standing apart, about seeing further than others so you wouldn't have to feel what they felt. He knew better now. Leadership, he understood, was proximity. It was choosing when to step forward and when to step aside. It was knowing that silence could be strength, but only if it was followed by action. His phone buzzed once more before he switched it to airplane mode. A final message from Chloe. "Boards aligned. Media cycle is moving on. This chapter is closing." Jonathan smiled faintly and set the phone down. Outside the aircraft, the sun began to rise, light spilling over the curvature of the earth, slow and inevitable. No announcement marked it. No applause followed. It happened because that's what light does. It shows up. He thought of Melissa Grant, sitting somewhere far below, staring at screens that no longer obeyed her. Of Brian Grant, learning what it meant to wake up without access, without leverage, without a title to hide behind. Their downfall hadn't come from cruelty. It had come from exposure. He thought of Emily Parker, walking hospital corridors in Geneva, shoulders straighter now, voice steadier, carrying knowledge instead of apology. One seat, one moment. A small shift that changed the trajectory of a life. And then he thought of the countless others, the ones whose names would never trend, the ones who swallowed insults on planes, in offices, in stores, because pushing back felt too expensive, too risky, too lonely. This story wasn't about a billionaire. It never had been. It was about a line. The invisible one that separates confidence from entitlement, authority from arrogance, power from abuse. Most people crossed it every day without noticing. Some crossed it because no one ever stopped them, and a few crossed it because they believed the world was built to absorb their weight without consequence. Jonathan closed his eyes as the engines hummed steadily beneath him. He remembered his father's hands, calloused, honest, the way he used to say, "Never let anyone make you smaller so they can feel taller." That lesson had carried Jonathan further than money ever could. When the plane touched down hours later, there was no fanfare, no cameras waiting, no tension in the air. Just another arrival, another gate, another group of people gathering their things and moving forward. Jonathan waited his turn. He always did. As he stepped into the jet bridge, a flight attendant met his eyes and nodded. Not with awe, with understanding. That was enough. He walked on, blending into the flow, just another man with a worn blazer and a steady stride, carrying a story that had already done its work. Somewhere behind him, someone would tell this story again. Maybe at a dinner table, maybe online, maybe quietly, to themselves, the next time they felt invisible. And maybe, just maybe, they would remember this. Arrogance is loud. Power is calm. And dignity belongs to everyone. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to show it some support. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments with 3 simple words. Know your worth.